Welcome to Pacific College's master class. Oops, sorry about that. On plant medicine in Indigenous people with one of my favorite nurse practitioners, Me Fuimaono-Poe. It is with great pleasure that I introduce Me, who has over 20 years of nursing experience. She's worked in acute care and oncology, medical surgical, pediatrics, and behavioral health. Her experience in the outpatient setting includes family practice and community health. She is currently the medical director for Maui Cannabis Clinic. At the clinic, May oversees the daily clinic flow, assesses and certifies patients for medical cannabis use, and creates individualized dosing plans based on goals and symptom management. Since founding the clinic in 2016, May has certified over 8,000 patients in the state of Hawaii. Because of the political nature of cannabis, May is also involved in lobbying at the legislature and petitioned the state of Hawaii to add more qualifying conditions for cannabis use. She has also presented to the Hawaii State House and the Attorney General about cannabis and opioid use disorder. While working at the only level 1 trauma center in the Pacific Basin, May worked with her team to develop and implement several programs, including a suicide screening protocol, reduction of sitter usage, nurse practitioner residency, and helped to design a program to train nurses in trauma-informed care. She led a research project that looked at burnout in registered nurses and encouraged interventions to decrease compassion fatigue. The team presented the outcomes at Nursing Grand Rounds. May earned her associate degree in nursing from Penn Valley Community College, her master's degree in nursing from Hawaii Pacific University, and she's a family nurse practitioner certified by the American Academy of Nurse Practitioners. May insists on a healthy work-life balance. While not at work, she's with her family at the beach, hiking, gardening, or brunching with the besties. She's very actively involved in community organizing and is comfortable in boardrooms or with a bullhorn. She works with several local environmental and cannabis organizations. She's actively working for an adult use program in a Hawaii community that provides justice for those who've been adversely affected by the war on drugs. And it is with great pleasure that I now turn it over to May for this incredible talk. So thank you, May.
Thank you for that, Eloise, for that introduction. You're totally one of my favorites too. So I am just really excited to be here and just kind of talking about my community and my experience with just kind of working within Indigenous cultures in Hawaii. So I am going to go ahead and get started. So first off, so Eloise gave that great introduction of who I am professionally. It's kind of long. I'm like, no wonder I'm tired sometimes. So I'm just going to give a little bit more of just kind of a personal introduction of who I am and what got me here into this place now. So I'm a family nurse practitioner. I am the 4th generation of my family to live here in Hawaii. This is actually how we became Americans. My family is from American Samoa, and I was born and raised in Independence, Missouri. I'm a cannabis activist, so I have been involved in activism with cannabis since the early 90s. I went on the hemp walk with Jack Herrera, and that walk was a walk that was throughout California. I did it in Sacramento, and that was really kind of one of my first tastes of real, of cannabis activism, and since then I've kept it up with both environmental and cannabis. Nurse researcher, so I did. I was lucky enough to do some researching, a research project at Queens Medical Center, and community organizer, educator, and then of course we do a lot of just events where I'm able to talk. And this is a picture here of me and my grandma. So this is me and both of my grandparents. This is Paese Paliafine Fuimaono And this is my grandfather, Me Fuimaono. So my grandmother was actually an herbalist and a traditional midwife. So a lot of what I learned about healing and healing myself and using plants has really been from my grandmother and from my aunties. So what are we going to talk about? So this is really about cannabis and Polynesia, but I just want to kind of give an introduction into Polynesians and plant medicines, where we have always really used plant medicines. I want to talk about the canoe plants, some that were brought over, modern and daily use, how we've taken some of these practices and they never really stopped. They're still being very consistently used. And then I'm going to move into really the history of cannabis prohibition in the state of Hawaii. And kind of, I think that we hear a lot about the war on drugs, but this is just really our kind of version of the war on drugs and what happened here. And with Green Harvest. We're going to talk a little bit about Operation Wipeout. And then from there, we're going to go into the medical cannabis program, because it's important to know kind of where you started, to know where you're at, to know where you're going. And then from there, I'm going to talk about multicultural cannabis care. So this is really kind of taking a framework and applying it to working with cannabis patients from really, multi-ethnic, really diverse communities. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about implicit and explicit bias in healthcare. And then moving forward to inclusivity, and also I'm going to go over just kind of legislation, lobbying, just some basics with that as well. So lots of stuff and lots of stories. So medical plants of Polynesia. So this was from a study that was done here in Hawaii. This was, they asked, Native Hawaiians who were accessing healthcare, do you use some other form of traditional medicine? And of that, 76 said yes. And I would say that that's pretty much true throughout all of, Polynesia, Oceania. So, speaking for, Samoans, it's definitely a part of our lives. And what are some of the modalities that are really commonly used? So massage, herbs, exercise, prayer and ceremony. So I really wanted to just kind of talk a little bit about the prayer and ceremony piece. So, with a lot of the traditional healings, prayer is really at kind of the center of it, because it's very much held that belief that, creator, God, Akua, Jesus, that is the healer. And we, as healers are more of a vessel. So throughout different traditional healing practices throughout Polynesia, you will oftentimes see some form of prayer or some form of ceremony. And then, so when it comes to plant medicine, so, as Polynesians, they were these great voyagers. So historically speaking, it started in Samoa. From Samoa, they went to Tonga, again into New Zealand, from there up to Tahiti, and then finally in Hawaii. So when people voyaged, they always brought plants with them. So they brought plants and animals, and the plants that they brought with them were for, food, fuel, fiber, right? But the medicinal plants that were typically brought are some that we see today. So noni, of course, there's so many noni products. It's like really hot with all the MLMs. Ava, so kava, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Ava pui, olena, of course, turmeric. It's something that is definitely still very, very much used and was really never, people never stopped using it. Pia tea, so the key tea plant, and ko sugar cane. So this is just kind of an example of plants of plant medicine that were brought over and that were always used by Polynesians. So just having that familiarity with plants and with using plant medicine. So there's a lot of different herbs and medicines that are used throughout Polynesia today. I'm really not going to get into it, but I wanted to just talk a little bit about Ava, which is Kava, which one that a lot of people are very familiar with, but it's one that has been used throughout Polynesia for centuries, and for the things that it was used historically is what it's used for now in modern times. So, insomnia, headaches, painful periods, ceremony, and for social gatherings. So, for Samoa, Ava is always part of any important ceremonies, like if there's a title, a high chief title, things like that. And, social gatherings, Ava is oftentimes at centers of social gatherings. Like I could go now to Ava. Well, it's not like a ceremony now. It's more just called a mix, and it's what all the younger people do, and it's more like play music, relax. But one thing that I really wanted to point out is Ava works on the same receptor as THC, so it works on the CB1 receptor. And so really, I think that a lot of the effects that we see from Ava is definitely involved with the endocannabinoid system. So just a little interesting side bit. So really, I just wanted to kind of bring that up so we could just talk about how plant medicine has really always fit in. So naturally, cannabis is going to be a pretty good fit. So cannabis and Polynesia. So we are going to talk about the war on drugs and how it kind of played out here in Hawaii. It was a little bit different. So I'm just going to kind of go over some of the highlights. So Pakalolo, it's the Hawaiian word for, it translates directly into numbing tobacco. This is the local paper, the Ka Nona Nona. It was the Hawaiian news language newspaper. So it was written in Hawaii. And in 1842, like many other places in the United States, cannabis was used as medicine, and it wasn't any different here. There were advertisements for it that were in the paper, and it's believed that whalers originally brought cannabis to the islands. So one of Captain Cook's early botanists, he was a very strong proponent of hemp. So on a lot of Captain Cook's original voyages, he was actually bringing hemp and starting to cultivate it wherever they went. Let's see here. So, oh, I don't know why my slide is not advancing. Let me try it this way. Okay, so Slinger. So yeah, so Slinger he went everywhere. Slinger is definitely the father of the modern cannabis prohibition. And no part of the United States was spared from that. So he was the Assistant Commissioner of Prohibition, which he went on to be the Commissioner for the U.S. Bureau of Narcotics. And then in 1931, marijuana prohibition passed in the state of Hawaii. And at this time, this is really when we're seeing Hawaii transition into statehood. So it was very much a tumultuous time in that history. And then, of course, not too long after that, it was Pearl Harbor. So cannabis in its heyday. So really, Vietnam, and this is really where we saw kind of the cannabis culture in Hawaii and this cultivation culture that Hawaii is so famous for. This is really when we saw it start to really take hold. So soldiers who fought in Vietnam brought back seeds from Hawaii, and from then they started cultivating and breeding cannabis plants. And this is really where we saw some of the most famous strains or chemovars from that era emerge. And, these are still super famous. So Maui Wowie, Kauai Electric, Puna Butter. When you hear people talk about this time in history with cannabis, you hear stories of entire truck beds just filled with cannabis. And a lot of these legacy growers, they are still growing, or their descendants are. So that's one really cool thing. And despite everything they went to really be able to do this. So we're going to kind of talk about that. So Green Harvest. So Green Harvest was our cannabis eradication program. I know that they have several throughout the United States, but here it was pretty aggressive. So it started in 1978 in Hawaii Island, so on the Big Island. And then in 1980, they decided to take it statewide. So this was multi-agency. So this wasn't just one agency. It was Hawaii Police Department, so HPD, DEA, FBI, and the National Guard. And it was funded through national grants. And because of all of these agencies that work together, the cost is still unknown. So we can imagine it would be a lot. And so I wanted to use this picture, even though it's not like the greatest quality, because I just wanted to kind of explain what's going on here. So if you can see, there's this rainbow helicopter and the side is open, and you can see this guy dressed in black kind of hanging out. Well, what they would do is they would get intel that there was, this field over here, and then they would go to it, and these guys would rappel down, cut the cannabis stalks down, and then they would tie them as you can see, to the helicopter, and then they would go and drop it off at like these big truck stands that were waiting down the road. So it was like quite the operation. And with that, they seized 1.9 million plants, and that was just in 1 year. That was in 1987. So if Green Harvest wasn't aggressive enough, we in 1989, our Attorney General Warren Price, he did a survey on Hawaii's war on drugs, and it was at that point that he, with this survey and with the report that he turned into the national, to the federal government, they declared Hawaii as this high intensity drug trafficking area, mainly with cannabis. And so they decided that they were going to, again, multi-agency, but this time they added the Air Force. So the Air Force would literally go in, get surveillance, figure out where the cannabis farms were, and then go in and destroy them. So one thing that was different about Operation Wipeout compared to Green Harvest was in Operation Wipeout, they retrofitted these helicopters with, I don't know, it almost like a super shooter, like those big Nerf guns, the liquid, but it was filled with glyphosate. So what they were doing was they would hover over your plants and they would come in and just completely drench them with glyphosate and just kill that entire area. During that year, when it was really intense with the Operation Wipeout, 90% of Hawaii's outdoor crop was destroyed. Street value was over $6 billion. And I actually lived in Maui during this time, during Operation Wipeout. So you would just literally be sitting on your porch, hanging out with your family, and they would fly in, and they flew so close that, like, if you had, like the long California grass, it would all just be flattened. That's how close they flew. And just like, this is this is their logo. So I just want to say, this is what happens when you don't get good graphic designers. And anyways, so what does it look like now? So basically, as all of this was going around, people have been really this entire time, saying that this is a waste of money, and we actually were able to really defund Green Harvest and Operation Wipeout. So Green Harvest, although they still do occasionally fly here in Hawaii, it's way less than what it was. And so in 2019, so what does that look like in 2019? They went to 24 sites and they seized 1,800 plants and 15 pounds of processed cannabis. So it has definitely decreased this war on drugs. And then also patients got involved in the medical cannabis movement, and we really started moving towards kind of, healing that. So, one thing about Hawaii is we actually passed the first medical cannabis bill in 1978. It provided the framework for other famous ones like 215 that was in California. And even though we wrote it and we passed it. It was never enacted. But because of that, that bill that was written in 1978, a lot of that original kind of language was put into our medical cannabis program and our legislation. So in 2020, Hawaii became the 8th state to pass a medical cannabis program, and we were the first state to do it through legislation. So a lot of the other ones were done through until this point. They were all done through voter initiatives. So we were the first state to do it legislatively. And currently we have 31,070 patients, and this was our number as of January. Let's see here. So because of having all of these patients, a lot of them are actually my patients. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about, I'm going to just talk about multicultural cannabis care. So why multicultural healthcare? And typically, what is multicultural healthcare? It's healthcare that's culturally sensitive and culturally responsible. Why is it important? BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, people of color communities typically have more health disparities. And this is certainly true in the state of Hawaii. Native Hawaiian, Polynesian experience disparities. Native Hawaiians have some of the highest rates of mortality when it comes to heart disease, cancer, stroke, accidents, diabetes, and of course also higher rates of arrest for marijuana possession. So it's not only with healthcare, but it's also with cannabis as well. I really loved this quote, this "A'ohe pau ka'ike ika halau ho'okahi." All knowledge is not taught in the same school. And this is really true when it comes to multicultural care. Here in Hawaii, because we have a very we're one of the havens for diversity, for multiculturalism. And so because of that, our School of Medicine, John A. Burns, they were asked to really do a project on how can Hawaii offer multicultural care. So this kind of foundation of what I'm going to go over today really came from their decades of work. And from that, they created this more of like a consensus on foundations for cultural competency. So I have taken, I've been a nurse for 20 years, so I've taken a lot of diversity training, a lot of cultural training, especially also being here in Hawaii. And I think that a lot of it is very narrow in a way that it doesn't take everything into account. So for example, if you were to take a cultural program about Samoa, Samoa and Samoans, it would include things that are typically of people who are from Samoa. It doesn't always take into account that there's first generation, second generation, and that we are all this living and very fluent and changing culture. So that's why I really kind of liked this culture, this consensus model, and it's been really just kind of cool learning about it. So I'm going to talk about it, but just really within the framework of being doing a cannabis care. So one of the first things that was kind of that consensus was eliciting understanding of illness. So this is really comes into listening to patients describe symptoms and you know, what does that look like in the real world. So I think having you know, old carts is really a great model because it gives the patients time to really explain. So, you know, how long have you been having them? What makes your symptoms better? What makes them worse? And then just giving them the time to explain that. Assessing for decision making, preferences, and roles in the family. So I'll always ask if anyone is here with you, and then if they would like them to be part of the meeting. I think that's always important, letting people choose. Do you have a caregiver? And how does your family feel about cannabis use? This is something that I think is specific towards cannabis use, because you can really just see if they're going to have that support at home. So yeah, so I think that, and then so techniques for oops, sorry. So really just kind of also ascertaining patients' perception of biomedicine. So this was part of the consensus model. So some of the ways to do that, you know, are you taking medications? Do you have a PCP? And how often are you going in for checkups? Because sometimes, you know, if you see something in your screening that's going to need further follow-up, it's just really good to see what kind of support that they have available. Let's see here. And use of complementary, so CAM. So I usually just put this on my intake form, and I ask, you know, what they're using, and pretty much in my experience with my clinic, a majority of my patients tend to use you know, complementary, and this is really their main form. So massage, acupuncture, and then I list herbal medicines, although not too many of them really have a lot of side effects with cannabis. It's always good to know. And what's worked for them in the past, finding that out can really help to move things forward. And then I always ask about cannabis use, just so I can know kind of the level of experience, and what symptoms they're looking for to help to have cannabis help with. So awareness of issues of mistrust and prejudice of the provider, and really just understanding the impact of race and ethnicity on clinical decision making. So understanding your own bias, and also understanding the bias when it comes to cannabis, because there's not only bias when it comes to people's, you know, ethnicity, you know, social status, you know, sexuality, but also, you know, bias when it comes to patients who use cannabis as medicine. And so just kind of knowledge of the cannabis culture, really the cannabis laws in your state is really just imperative. So what are some important things to know about your state? So knowing the history of prohibition, how did you get here? And really, if you are still a state that has no legal use, what are people doing to help with that? I also think it's really important to know the arrest rates, who, what, and where. ACLU has a really great report on that. And again, legislation for medical and adult use. So current regulations. And this, if you are a cannabis clinician, it is really important that you share this information with every patient. So that way they know the rules and just upcoming cannabis bills and legislation. So bias directly affects patient care. So explicit bias is really just kind of that conscious bias that you have about a group of people, and implicit bias is more of your unconscious bias. I took a class from one of my friends, Shayla Brown, and it was really about racism in medical settings, and she brought up Project Implicit. So I think that this is a really great website. So you can actually go on Project Implicit and you can take a series of tests, and it kind of will go over some of your explicit and implicit bias, because these are oftentimes things that you're not maybe aware of. So becoming more aware of that. And really just considering your own bias, especially when it comes to cannabis use. So I just wanted to bring up these cannabis myths. When I first opened my practice, so many of my colleagues are like, I can't believe you're leaving, to do this. And I think a lot of that was because people still hold on to a lot of these myths, especially as professionals, that it makes you lazy, it's addictive, that it's a gateway drug, kills brain cells. I've kind of heard it all, but these are all myths, and there's actually a lot more. So really, just also educating yourself on cannabis and on these powerful myths. So how do we kind of move past all of this and move into a place where I'm not talking about this? It's more talking about it in a historical sense instead of what we're doing right now, and that really comes into inclusivity and legislation. So policy started the war on drugs, and policy can really end it. And not only can policy end the war on drugs, but it can also help to repair the damage. So this is the MORE Act. The MORE Act has a lot of really good foundations. It's not perfect, but I know that they're kind of working on revamping it. So one of the really important things about the MORE Act that it does is it's expungement of cannabis offenses, and it's automatic. So people don't have to go through this huge process to get their records expunged. So even in states where expungement was passed, people have to still do work to get that expungement. So having that be just automatic is huge. It also asks for research, so statistics on demographics of cannabis owners and employees. And then prohibits denying federal benefits for people with cannabis offenses, and funding research for societal impact in legal cannabis. So really, one of the more important things about the MORE Act is this trust fund for communities impacted by the war on drugs, and it'll be funded by a tax. And this tax would create funding and loans for communities that have been impacted by the war on drugs. So really having the communities for expungement, but also funding, putting money into communities of color, and really the ones that have been impacted most, again, by the war on drugs. It's really important that not only is the legislation passed, but that it's also funded as well. So there's some really great models out there. You know, I think that when we look at inclusivity in cannabis through legislation and policy, there's some states and some cities that are doing some good work. So Illinois, you know, I think it has been one of the more famous ones, and just kind of watching that roll out, as well as City of Oakland, City of Portland. But what this comes down to is, you know, no matter what they do federally with the MORE Act, it's still going to be really important to work at the state level. So this is where I tend to do most of my work is really at the state level. And, you know, I think that when people think about, you know, testifying, lobbying, they think that it's, you know, really, really stressful, really hard. And to an extent, it can be, but I'm just going to give you my little tricks on how I stay kind of updated. Sorry, I'm just watching my time. So every state has a website for Hawaii. It's like hawaii.gov. So you just need to register to testify, and then it's going to ask you to you know, what bills do you want to watch? So for me, just choose the ones with the keywords cannabis, marijuana, working with established groups. I think that that's really, really important. There's definitely strength in numbers. Find bills to support and show up and testify. And you know, with the age of Zoom and kind of what we're doing now, testifying has actually gotten much simpler in some places. In Hawaii, you can do all of it digitally, electronically. So that's been really awesome. So when you testify, this is just some of my key little points. At this point, I've probably testified on over 100 different bills over the past decade, for, you know, cannabis and for environmental issues. So through making every mistake possible, I learned the hard way. So this is what I wish that I would have known going into it. So show up early. This is really, really important. If it's going to start at 9, show up at 8:30. That way you can make sure that you're on the list and you can get seating, dressed professionally. So I always show up in like a pencil skirt, nice shirt. This is really important. Type out your testimony and bring a copy for the lawmakers, because I tend to typically be talking about a lot of medical type issues. I will also have just a single copy of all of the articles. And now that I'm testifying online, I will actually just upload the PDFs with it. Whenever you are testifying, address that specific body. So, you know, if it's Ways and Means, Judiciary, Finance, address them. Introduce yourself, including any credentials. Know your time limit. So I always find out, like, typically it's 60 to 90 minutes. 90 seconds. So know where your time limit is. practice and save a recording and share it to your social media sites. And that's really how you can help to kind of get the word out. I did a lot of work with Thiesen, my biotech, and that was one of our biggest tools was really uploading it and sharing it. So final thoughts. Okay, so it's been like it's been a good journey. I know we went kind of all over the place, and this is really where this was after probably one of my most important presentations. It was at the Attorney General's office. It was me, and this is my colleague, Dr. Cliff Otto. He is another huge advocate here in Hawaii. And it was him and I in a room full of prohibitionists, and we were really just talking about, really sticking to the science of cannabis. And so what are some of, after hearing everything, what are some of the things that you can take and kind of integrate into, a cannabis practice? So really, 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 really important, knowing the history of prohibition in your state, understanding the current federal and state laws regarding cannabis in your state, multicultural care. It's really small changes, and really just having that respect. Understand your own bias, and then working within your community to heal the damage done by the war on drugs. And then this is me, this is my contact. So this is actually Dr. Sue Sichel, and this is our Lieutenant Governor, Josh Green. We did a presentation while Sue was here talking about just kind of the feds and DEA. So again, just more, work legislatively. So I'm gonna answer some questions, and this is how you find me. This is my Pacific College, that's my office number, and my website, maliecannabisclinic.com. And so I know Eloise was gonna come up, and she was just gonna go over any questions that might have come up. So I think that they're probably, so you can also find us on social media. So our Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. So if you like TikTok and TikTok videos, you can find us at Malie Cannabis on TikTok. And
Hi.
hi.
I'm not sure if you can hear me. I guess Eloise might have a couple technical issues. We haven't had that questions. Oh, here she is. Okay, wonderful. Go for it.
Just waiting for the delay on YouTube there. So yeah, May, thank you so much for that excellent presentation. I welcome anyone who may have some questions for May at this time. I'm sure she'd love to answer some questions, and if not, I have some questions myself that I would love to sort of stimulate some dialogue with you, May, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
So with the amount of patients that you've seen, over those 8,000 patients, and having about 31,000 patients in Hawaii that are medical cannabis patients, what would you say the majority of those patients are coming to see you for? What are their overwhelming conditions?
Yeah, so pain is hands down number one. They're really in Hawaii and, also nationwide. I feel like if I pulled our statistics, it's pretty high. I would say probably with, upper 80s that it's pain.
And what would you say the average age of the patient that comes to see you is? Do you tend to see older adults or?
So I tend to see, so the average age in our state, I think it's like 51 for men and like 49 for women.
Okay.
So I
Wow.
would say, yeah, that's kind of the average age. You know, we don't have a lot of like really young people here. It's mostly people in the 40s, 50s, 60s. My youngest is 3 months old and my oldest is 103.
I love that.
Right?
It really does cut it right down the middle into the 50.
It does. It really does.
That's so great. I think, I loved how you focused on activism. One of the best words of advice that I got when I got into this space was act local, think global. And, that really does still work. And, I think the work that you're doing in Hawaii is fascinating, because when I visited, I felt like cannabis was such a part of the culture. And when we did that talk together, and the blessing that was done before our talk was incredibly, it just affected me so much. Yet I feel like at the government level, there's a disconnect there. So do you have any comments on that in terms of how, really it's been part of the culture for so long, yet you're so restricted still, right?
Yeah, so we only have a medical program, and our medical program, as far as medical programs go, it's pretty decent. We finally got dispensaries in 2016. They opened. Before we didn't have dispensaries, and we have a very, very, very robust home cultivation scene here in Hawaii. But when it comes to our legislatures, they've been very slow to pass any adult use, which I think is both bad and good. I think it's bad, of course, because I would like to see it move faster, but we did pass decriminalization. So under 3.5, 3.5 grams, it's you get a ticket, and it's not on your record. They're trying to raise that this session to an ounce, to where you could possess an ounce, and just get a ticket. So, and the ticket is actually more expensive than coming to me. So just come to me.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I mean, it really is about keeping our patients safe, reducing harm, helping them, make good choices, as I usually say to my teenage kids. We got a couple questions that came in through the chat. So first one is, do you see any cancer patients for management of chemo side effects like nausea, constipation, and pain?
Absolutely, especially for nausea. I think that's kind of the number one reason that I see people with cancer. It's a pretty decent chunk of the population that I see, so probably about 10%. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting, some research that came out of Israel, and I think you and I both would agree that we're usually informed mostly through Israel's cannabis research more than we are here in the United States.
Absolutely.
And the research that came out was showing that some of these chemotherapy medications that cause chemotherapy-induced peripheral neuropathy are lessened, and in some cases prevented, with the concurrent use of cannabis. And I think, you and I would say that our patients would have been, experiencing this positive benefit for quite a while. And so I'm hoping that that kind of research will encourage oncology clinicians to become more educated and supportive of their patients' use.
Absolutely.
We see it work, right?
Yeah, and I that was one of the people that I really made sure to connect with first in my community, was the oncology group here. So they actually do a ton of referrals to me, and before the shutdown, I was going like probably once every 6 months to the support group. So it was like a good partnership for sure.
Oh, I love that. That's great. I mean, the studies have shown that most oncology patients are interested in use, yet they find that their oncology practitioners, clinicians are not educated. So it's good to bridge that gap.
Absolutely.
We got a couple more questions. One was, what do you think of medical providers using medical cannabis? Do you think that this will ever be accepted?
Yeah, it's really hard for medical providers because, it remains a Schedule 1. So, even those of us who use cannabis, if you have a license, a state license, or you have a federal DEA license, it can be jeopardized from cannabis use, and also people's employment. So really, we have to get some changes when it comes to this stigma, and it's only going to be accomplished through policy.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, the work that we've done with the American Cannabis Nurses Association, we've been able to witness the war on drugs that happens to nurses, especially,
Absolutely.
the BIPOC community seems to be, at a disadvantage. They're more likely to be affected by the war on drugs negatively. So policy changes it. We need to stop requiring drug testing, I think, across the level for pre-employment and employment, at least with THC. Another question came in. Do you use traditional herbal medicine to augment or moderate the effects of cannabis therapeutically? I'm so happy you mentioned Kava. It has a nice synergy with cannabis clinically.
Yes. So I would say yes. I would say that Kava and cannabis are very happy partners, and I see that is probably the most. I see a lot of people also augment CBD with turmeric. So we have a lot of local people who make CBD blends, and that seems to be one of the more popular ones. So yeah, absolutely. So the two that I see the most are turmeric and Kava.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Eloise?
I see a lot of, turmeric, curcumin. That's probably the biggest one in terms of plant-based medicine. I see a lot of melatonin being used.
Oh yeah, chamomile hops.
Yep.
Okay.
Another couple. So questions are coming in. Do you think you can get reparations for those that have been arrested or even ticketed for an MJ crime such as possession?
Yeah. So I think that is easiest done at the federal level. We've seen it at the state level, but if it happens federally, it can just really wipe it out for everyone. So I think that that's the goal, but also working at the state level, and really when writing expungement laws, I think that it needs to be a way to actually carry that out, because it's great in theory, but when you do it in practice, it can be a little bit harder. Hawaii has some expungement clinics, and that's been really good. So I think having some of these, agencies provide that. I know Last Prisoner Project has done some. I know Minorities for Medical Marijuana, they've done some. Indica in Los Angeles, they've done expungement clinics. But having it be automatic is really, really, really the way, because it's hard to get them oftentimes still, even with the legislation.
Yes, absolutely. I know we only have a couple questions left or minutes left. And so 2 questions. One is, does it help with appetite? And the other question is about using Rick Simpson oil. Have you heard of it used to help kill cancerous cells?
Okay. So the first one, what was, can you repeat the first one again?
Sure. Appetite. Does it help?
Yeah,
appetite?
so absolutely. So absolutely. With appetite, there's it's really cannabinoids that help with it. So, you know, I see a lot of THC rich and CBG is another really good appetite stimulator. So Rick Simpson oil, I know it's like our last couple of minutes. So it's like the most controversial question out there. I actually have a ton of patients who use it and use it for different things. But you know, cancer is not just one cancer. It is many different types. It's leukemia, it's skin cancer, it's breast cancer. There's not one size fits all when it comes to Rick Simpson oils, and using these really high concentrations of THC in certain cancers can make it worse. So I think if you're going to be using Rick Simpson oils, I think that you should be working with somebody who really knows how to work with them, and somebody who's experienced in oncology. You know, with that said, you know, we have a ton of little, you know, it was originally created for skin cancer, right? We have a ton of skin cancers here. So, you know, I see a bunch of aunties here using it on that. And it's been really interesting. It's been really good to see. You know, I think that the science is catching up with what the people are doing, and kind of vice versa. So, so I'm open to it, but I think that it should be used with in conjunction with somebody who's really versed in that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point and a great way to end it. You know, working with a qualified clinician who's knowledgeable about your cancer disease, as well as what to expect from a treatment like that, is crucial to reducing harm and making sure that people are, you know, not having such adverse side effects that they can't function.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we are at 5:01, top of the hour, and I just want to make sure to thank you again, May, for this excellent presentation and the time to talk about this really important topic. And I know that we've pretty much answered all of the questions here for everyone today, and hopefully everybody can join me in thanking. And here comes the thank yous right now. So thanks, May.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Mahalo.
Bye.